Hi, this is Chad Torben for Tech in the District. Last week we traveled to Vienna, Virginia to interview Dan Rainey, General Partner at Grotech Ventures, for this edition of Tech in 5.
Hey Don, thanks again for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the first question. What is something that's unique about the Washington, D.C. venture scene that someone outside the Beltway might not know or think about?
I think there's a great deal going on here that isn't necessarily obvious to the casual observer. We have a community that has technology pillars in both defense and in communications and in content or consumer-oriented plays. Defense is interesting because it has a more broad application for a variety of solutions than is immediately apparent. Defense is about security. And so whether you have a financial application or a banking application or other applications, healthcare related, where the information needs to be secure, we have knowledge and expertise in this community about how to keep information secure. It's world class. In that same regard, we also have a great deal of expertise here about the communications of wireless data, which is, mobile data has become a very popular, if not completely ubiquitous, consumer application. And here we have more people that understand more about antennas. If you take a Navy destroyer, the average Navy destroyer has 137 antennas, and they all have to operate independently of each other and not interfere with each other. We have people here that understand wireless. It's not surprising that Nextel and some of the wireless companies that have succeeded here because they always could draw on a pool. And then finally, we have people that not only understand consumer technologies out of the AOL diaspora, but also people that understand public policy related internet technologies. People here understand that the limits and appropriateness of Federal Trade Commission interaction with consumers online. People understand financial regulation. People understand all manners of the intersection of public policy and consumers. So, and that too is an area where we have somewhat of a unique pool of talent. So it's surprising. From the outside, maybe it's a sleepy little government town. From the inside, there's some knowledge, some expertise, some unique know-how from which that you can build better companies in a variety of areas.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you touched on the government because that leads us to our next question. So I think maybe for some people outside the Beltway, and we have a lot of viewers in Silicon Valley that are watching this, what percentage would you say of local startups are focused on creating solutions for the government as their client, or are they more focused on creating stuff for mainstream average consumers at the same time? And where do they sort of have their focus?
Well, we're an interesting and also somewhat unique entrepreneurial community in that regard. Really in the last 10 years, it became possible for a local DC area entrepreneur to build a pretty good company, a company that could be expected to return money to the entrepreneur, to potentially the company's investors, from defense or from government-related work. That wasn't true 20 years ago, wasn't true 30 years ago. So we have an entrepreneurial pool of talent, which is those that are operating in the government sphere and those that are operating in the commercial sphere. And that makes us fairly unique. So most other cities, maybe you even look at Silicon Valley, which is commonly viewed as the hotbed of entrepreneurial startup behavior. They have a defense component, but it's much smaller. We're much more evenly balanced between the two. It'd be hard to fixate on percents, but they're both viable big communities, and I think they'll both stay big communities.
Interesting. Well, what do you think makes DC such a fertile ground for these startups to serve as a launching pad for?
Well, a lot of times there's a stability in the spouse's or the partner's job, which is not insignificant. We see the startup community is driven in part by people going home to a spouse or a partner and saying, now is the right time for me to leave my paying job and to go start this thing that I've dreamed of starting, or to do this thing I've dreamed of doing. And the first question for most two-income couples is, how stable is the job of the person that is going to be carrying the freight for a while. And we have a lot of good, stable jobs, and that's enabling, right? You can't necessarily, if you have a family, be in a situation where you put both incomes are at risk. Now that does mean that by the vagaries of these things, that various points are people don't go home to a spouse or a partner and say, I'm going to start a company. They didn't do it in the fall of 2001, and they didn't do it in the fall of 2008, because the macro environment didn't make anyone say, gosh, this is a great time to start something new. I mean, there was sufficient fear and uncertainty to keep it from happening. But we are enabled by the fact that we have a lot of well-educated two-income couples, and where the critical spouse in the startup is the one that's going to make the money while the other person pursues the dream. We benefit from that.
Well, I think John Boehner pointed out today that the federal government added 200,000 federal workers in the last 2 years, so hopefully we'll see a whole new slew of startups coming in the next couple of years.
Yeah,
as well.
there's always an unintended consequence. Yes.
That's great. So let me ask you, Don, you see a lot of startups and you see a lot of pitches and you see a lot of companies. I think if we look at the trend of cloud computing, for example, and we just take that one, it's had a real impact, I think, on companies over the last 5-10 years in terms of how they're growing their business. A lot of businesses come out of the trend of cloud computing. Is there any trend similar to that you're seeing that maybe we might emerge in the next 5-10 years that's really going to be a growth driver for maybe startups and for the enterprise as well?
I think there are a couple that we're following very closely, and they're maybe not as much completely technology trends, but there are trends that we need to explore. The first is transparency, and we saw with WikiLeaks that there wasn't much of a hurdle to put a tremendous amount of previously secret information and to make it public. And I think that the internet and the ability of anyone to publish information, and more importantly perhaps the ability of people to find that published information, means that more and more of the heretofore opaque is going to be clear. And that's significant on a number of levels. That means that the commercial practices in lending, the way banks are run, the way that we're all tracked online when you visit a website and the advertiser begins to follow you and chase you, and to the way your personal information is sold. If one of us buys a car, then or makes another major purchase, oftentimes our data is sold and resold and resold, and we don't know by whom, to whom, for what. And there's a lack of transparency there that I think can't survive. And I think that one of the big trends we'll see continually is more and more will be in the light of day. And that will cause great opportunities for small companies to protect people, to enable that transparency. It'll be a burden on companies that are doing things that maybe they wouldn't want fully disclosed. So transparency, I think, is upon us. The other, I think, that's interesting, also not necessarily a technological play like cloud computing in and to itself, but is also intriguing, is we're 1 or 2 revolutions away from people realizing that they can self-organize to do almost anything, and that social media is going to remove intermediaries that are now tasked and paid to act and represent others. It's going to mean that the dialogue is more and more current, that companies that wish to market don't necessarily, won't have the time to craft and perfect messages, that they're going to have to participate in what we call authentic voice in a real-time social media stream. So there is self-organization and the shortening of response time and the evolution of social media into this continuous dialogue, and in itself that dialogue means we've got to change how we spin messages and how we represent ourselves and how we participate. It's a real challenge for anybody that's in representing groups, that anybody's marketing, that anybody that's in politics. They all have to recognize that the spinning of messages is just not going to get the time and preparation and be able to be done in such a prepackaged way as it once was.
Yeah, that's tough news for folks in our industry.
Well, it may be the boom of your industry.
Very true.
I think that it's harder for a company to discern what's being said in real-time social media and to understand what the trends are and to determine what the response is than it is to say, let's take time and effort and really figure out our key messages and our key constituencies and our key delivery methods. Real-time demands an expertise and an immediacy that people will pay for. I think that that campaigns in the next coming years will really have to be very social media savvy and to understand that if you tweet something to 30 people, then in 30 minutes that can be in front of 600,000 commonly. And so what you tweet and getting it to 600,000 people, from 30 to 600,000, is a skill, and it's a professional skill. So I think that there is a certain set of opportunities that will come from this.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that. Okay, Don, last question. We're gonna remember we got some local audience and some not so local. So if I'm a visitor and I'm planning a trip to Washington D.C. this spring or summer, what's the one piece of advice you can give me?
You have to go to the the Library of Congress, and you have to see that beautiful, beautiful lobby. It's overlooked. Yeah, it's incredible. I grew up here, kind of, as a CIA brat, and before the internet, I would go down to the Library of Congress on any subject that I had an interest, and look in the card catalog, which was immense, and get 30 books, and sit at the desks and read them. And I'm just a lifelong fan of the Library of Congress, and it's an experience that I think every American should have, to go in there, to think all that this building and its annexes have every book. It's a can't miss. If you're not familiar with the district, the Library of Congress is just stellar.
Thanks, Don. Really appreciate your time.